Hello, and thank you for coming to our panel today. My name is Tim. I'm a salesperson for the National Association for Cannabis Business. And today we have Heather Cabot. She is an award winning journalist, author, and host of the New Chardonnay podcast. She is a former ABC News correspondent and anchor, contributor to Forbes Women, and serves on the alumni board of Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. Cabot is the author of the New Chardonnay, Crown Currency 2020, and the co author of Greek Girl Rising Inside the Sisterhood Shaking Up Tech. All right, Heather, I'm going to send it over to you now.
Thanks so much, Tim. I appreciate it. And I'm so pleased to be here today with this really esteemed panel. I'd like to welcome to the virtual stage with me, first of all, Roz McCarthy, the founder and CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Jennifer Wetzel, founder of Women in Cannabis and the founder of Lady Jane Branding. And Morgan Forsey. Morgan is a partner in the Labor and Employment Practice Group of Shepherd, Mullen, Richter, and Hampton, and she's the managing partner of the San Francisco office. Thank you so much for joining us for this really important discussion about diversity in the workplace. I think it's really fascinating given that this is, cannabis is a burgeoning industry. And as we've seen in other industries, diversity and inclusion have been problematic, and particularly in those that have been male dominated from the get go. So let's start off with Roz. And as we've all discussed initially, I mean, recruiting is certainly one of the first things that businesses need to think about. So, Roz, just to start off, how can cannabis companies do a better job of finding candidates from a variety of backgrounds? Let's just start there.
Sure. I mean, it's a loaded question, and so thank you so much, Heather, for you're like we're gonna shoot it right off the gate, right? And, and we're gonna just go for it, right? Morgan, you're laughing because really it's a huge question. There's so many different answers and so many different techniques and what have you. And the main thing is one, I would say corporations in the cannabis industry we need to historically look back at the dot-com, the technology industry, the banking industry, and we've seen just some of these industries that have done a poor job in creating diversity and inclusion in their cultures. And one, just to even have a historical background of some of the challenges and why there have been challenges can really, from a mind perspective, and then from a leadership perspective, and from an executive perspective, really to help to lay down the foundation of what corporations want to do and how they want to do it. Because I really believe, when people go, well, I can't find them, I don't know where to go. That is really, for me, it's an excuse. And I think when you have individuals who make a commitment to diversity from the top down, and it's not just talk, they're very, it's almost like if I'm looking at my bottom line from my revenue perspective, and I look at what my human capital perspective, what that looks like from a diversity perspective, and if they're not aligned, you don't feel like you got. So I think it's such a huge loaded question, but I think there has to be a foundation of the individuals that are in these corporations at the top down, are really making this a priority from day one. And then from there, there's so many different resources. There's so many different organizations like, Women in Cannabis, Minorities for Medical Marijuana. I mean, and not only that, there's community-based smaller entities that would love to be a part of that conversation of filling that pipeline. So that's just my thoughts starting out, but I would love to hear what my other colleagues, what your
Yeah.
thoughts are as well.
Well, let's open it up. I'd love that it is a really broad question. I mean, and you're right. You each have different perspectives on it. So I guess, let's hear what, Jennifer and Morgan, what do you think to start off on that?
The what we found in the women in cannabis study was that women get into the industry for a variety of reasons, and there are a lot of women who want to be in this industry. So as Roz said, there are a lot of resources to find those women, and it is critical to start at the top and put together your diversity targets and meet them and track them and make sure that it is part of your operating agreement, and make sure that it is part of your company values, and to make sure that everyone who works for you knows what your values are, so that you can show your employees and potential hires that this is something that you value. And if you don't do that, people will notice, and it will be difficult to recruit the right talent to your team.
Same thing, Morgan. Your
Yeah, so I come from the legal perspective. So what are, what are the parameters that you're facing? And, there are a lot of laws on the books that prevent discrimination based on, well, in California, it's based on virtually anything you can think of, from, genetics to, gender identification to color to backgrounds of all kinds. So those laws help prevent you from discrimination, but they don't help you if your mission is really to expand and diversify and create equity and inclusion in your workforce. So you do need to, I think, as both Jennifer and Roz have said, you have to start with a mission and a cultural statement and a vision, and from there you then call me and say, okay, can we do this and not get sued? But I can say, speaking to, Roz's comment about this being a new industry and we're starting, this is a really, really good time to make those commitments and investigate now, because what's really hard to do is to undo it once you've done it. And as a managing partner of a law firm, one of the most white male industries that you can think of, it is really hard to figure out how to create a culture that is inclusive and has the diversity that you want. So, I encourage anybody who's starting out, or even if you, already far along, to really, put the building blocks in place now, because it's really, really hard to unwind once it's there.
I want to get to the culture, absolutely, and sort of. I think we also talked earlier when we first met about leadership at the top and cultivating that leadership. So I definitely want to get to that. But before we get there, I'd also like to just go back to the point about the pipeline. And Roz, when we spoke, there were two things that you mentioned that I thought were interesting. One was about workforce development and companies thinking about where they locate. In tech, this is happening as well. I was actually just reading today about Atlanta trying to become a tech hub, and resources for entrepreneurs there of color. So I'd love for you to talk about your thoughts on workforce development as a potential way to think about companies diversifying who actually they're hiring.
Sure.
And you had a great example too, I think, when we discussed one company in particular.
Absolutely. So we were talking about one company in particular that took the initiative to not only create their corporate, basically they put their corporate headquarters in a majority minority community in a county. And so what we're talking about is, if you are someone that's going to be servicing a population, you got a processing license or what have you, there's some really economic benefits to being able to go into a area that may be a minority majority area that may need a little bit of economic tax lifting that you're able to bring to that community, that you're able to, like, it's very intentional, and you can do that because when you're starting from fresh and you're applying for that license, there is such a great narrative that you can put into your application when you speak about the fact that you are going to be going into an area that you're going to uplift it. And there's tax credits, there's opportunities on credits, there's all these things from a financial and from the accounting perspective that might really balance out the fact that you're thinking, like, why should I go here? Well, there's people, there's the normally the low the rent, the space that you're renting or that you're buying, you can probably get it at a great bargain basement, because they need more companies to come in to provide workforce into that community. And so, shout out to Trulieve, and that's who I was referring to. They really did a great job. Their location is in Quincy, Florida, which is in Gadsden County. It's a majority minority community. It's the only one in the state of Florida. And they literally have lifted the tax base and have created all this new workforce opportunity for individuals. And there were individuals of color who would not have had that company decided to go maybe in another part of the state of Florida. So it's a really interesting opportunity because you get women, you get diversity in regards to ethnic diversity, you get diversity in regards to experiences, because you got some people that have farming experience, some people that have manufacturing experience. So you get that, that workforce experience kind of diversity. It's a really cool concept to take a look at and figuring out, companies think about going into those different areas that may need that uplifting. And I think it's just something that's really worked for True Leave, and I commend them on what they've done.
It's when you think about it, I mean, it's mutually beneficial, to the communities and to the companies. And I love the fact that they were intentional about it. And, as we said earlier, the fact that so many of these companies are just starting out, this is the time that they could actually be thinking about that.
Right.
I want to shift a little bit to pay parity, because I think that also lends itself to both the pipeline and also retaining workers. Jennifer, you've done a lot of research into the state of women in the industry. What can you tell us about how the cannabis industry compensates women and people who identify as female compared to men? And how does this affect recruiting and hiring? Are they competitive? Are they seeking out people from different backgrounds? Have we finally shifted to that, or are women still having to settle for making less?
Yes, women are still having to settle for making less. We asked women if they are paid the same salary as male coworkers in similar positions, and only 25% said yes. Um, about half said no, and the rest weren't sure. And when it comes to recruiting and hiring, I think it affects more retention than recruiting and hiring, because we know why women join the cannabis industry, and it's because they're passionate about cannabis, whether it's help them or a friend, and they want to spread that message. They want to use their skills in a new industry. We also know that 87% of the women who work in this industry use cannabis at least once a week, and 69% use daily. So perhaps they might not be wanting to work in other industries where that might not be welcome. And we know that they make significant sacrifices to work in the space, including money and savings and low pay, but they do it anyway. They're passionate and they want to succeed. So I think that perhaps right now women are not expecting to make a lot of money in this industry, but they want to be in it. But then it gets worse from there.
And the truth is they could make a lot of money. I think
Yeah.
that's right. I mean, that's kind of the thing. I mean, they actually could make a lot of money if they had the right support, and if they were getting paid more and they had more of a leg up. Is there transparency? Like, do women talk about this? Did this come up in your research that women are chatting about the fact that they don't make the same as their male counterparts?
It didn't come up really whether it was whether there was transparency around the issue. I think I think women do talk about it. But I also know that a lot of the companies in this industry. I was talking to a few recruiters, and they were saying that many companies don't have HR, or if they do, it's the marketing person is also the HR person. So there's not the system doesn't exist to help these women, and so I don't think that there's a lot of discussion around it.
So Morgan, to you, this is this is one of the things we talked about, is that these companies, the ones that are really, and this is in any industry, frankly, that where you're a startup. I mean, if you're on a shoestring budget, you probably don't have budget for a designated HR department. So what should these entrepreneurs be thinking about, and how can they get ahead of some of these issues like pay parity or creating a culture of inclusion from the start? Like, what is your advice?
Yeah, so one of the things that happens is, companies do it. It start rather organically, a group of friends, maybe some colleagues from school, people who are like-minded and probably like gendered, like race, and they start something, and as it catches on, they bring more and more people on, and then at some point they hit a critical mass and they realize that they're not in compliance with a lot of laws, including things like pay equity. And so what I recommend is, you know as I said before, come up with your culture and your mission statement, and then ask the lawyers to help. But when you're talking about HR, collaborating with an HR person, and there's a lot of them now who are doing this on a consultation type basis, they can help you at the outset kind of structure that mission statement and structure your hierarchies, and however you're going to have your division of labor in such a way that you can from the outset be on a good path to avoiding pay equity issues, and help you advance your mission of having diverse voices in your business. So I recommend that. I also recommend do chatting with a lawyer a little bit about at the outset about things like pay, about what states are better for you to have. I mean, now with remote work, right? Maybe you're going to have your processing in one area, you're growing somewhere else, you're marketing somewhere else, your HR somewhere else. An attorney can certainly help you how to take advantage of remote to foster diversity, but also comply with the law. So, when you're getting your lawyers doing all your deals and you're buying your real estate and you're doing all that, buy a little time with an employment attorney just to make sure we're building our company, the most important part of our company, are people in the way we want to do that.
I think the thing and correct me if I'm wrong, Roz and Jennifer, but I feel like one of the things that makes it harder in cannabis is that when you're applying for a license, before you can even open your doors, in many cases, you are doing some of the things you're talking about. Like, you've already secured your real estate before you even know if you have a company. So right, doesn't it make it harder to even think about these things because you don't even know if you're going to get the license? And so I'm just curious what you think about that. Like, is there a way? I mean, I don't know. I'm just curious. Is that a conversation that maybe when you're at the licensing process where you're just starting to apply, that maybe there's some kind of conversation that's happening, whether it's with the licensing authority or something, to kind of help you, because otherwise, I mean, you might not even be able to open. You've put in all this investment to apply for the license, but you don't even know if you really are going to have a company. So how are you going to then be investing in these important things early before you even know if, and I'm talking about something that's plant touching, obviously, but I'm just curious what you think about that, because it's sort of a backwards process.
Well, I think the issue is, and the concern is, for people of color, for women, for those individuals who may not have maybe the resources and maybe the relationships and the connection to kind of know some of this thing and kind of know and be strategic about it. I think nowadays you're starting to see different advocacy organizations, like a shout out to Women Grow. We just did a boot camp with the ladies there at Women Grow. So MM facilitate the boot camp. It's called the Hemp Business Licensing Boot Camp. Basically, for $50, you attended the boot camp for all day long, and you basically got a chance to understand all you need to be thinking about if you're going to go after a license, like after a hemp license, if you're going to create your own brand. And so the same thing happens under the cannabis side. I think we as women, we are planners, we are strategic, we look at things, and not only, I mean, it's not Black women, brown women, white women. I think women in general. This is our in our DNA. This is who we are. And so in order to, I guess, when we talk about to kind of change the trajectory of the diversity in this industry, you're seeing us really start creating, before we go after a license, before we even invest those funds, before we even make those commitments, we're doing our homework. And I think the more resources that allow people to do their homework, to make better decisions, because I will tell you, when we have our boot camps, we have a third of the people say, yep, this is what I want to do. I'm going to get a license. I'm great. No problem. We have another third that says, you know what? Okay, I want to do this, but I don't have a skill set to do it by myself. I'm going to find a partner, or I'll find a partner in the room, and we're going to link up together. Then you have another third that says, you know what? Screw this. I'm not going after a license. What I'm going to do is, I'm a great marketing person, and all these people need marketing and they need, copywriting. And so guess what? I'm going to create a business that's just framed as an ancillary service to support the industry. And so for $50, you got that epiphany, which then allows you to give you direction and to make the better decisions. And so I just think, the competitiveness of going after a license, we're going to start seeing, I mean, across the board, people are making smarter decisions. They're doing their homework. They're looking at it and looking at like what happens way ahead of before I get my license. How much resources, how much money does it take? What do I need to do? Is this something I really want to do? And then make a decision from there. So that's just my take on it.
No, I think it's really important because I think the education is such a big part of this. And the fact that you even mentioned this boot camp, I mean, there may be people listening that didn't even know about that. And
Yep.
yet, what a great opportunity. Jennifer, I was going to let you follow up on that. Did you want to add anything?
I do not want to add to that one.
I wanted to go back to Morgan because I didn't, and I just want to stay on the recruiting for one more second, because we talked about this earlier, but in terms of recruiting, you had mentioned that one of the biggest hurdles in general, for finding people who are maybe from underrepresented groups, is that drug testing and criminal background checks can also get in the way in the early stages. Can you talk about that, and also how some of these companies may be able to rethink those policies, and how it could affect their recruiting and hiring?
Right. Yeah. So I'll start with, there's two main tests, as you mentioned. There's the drug testing and then there's criminal background check. I'll start with drug testing because I know it sounds like, wait a minute, why would we be testing for drugs? We're in the cannabis industry. Well, I sort of see drug testing going in three buckets. There's when must I test, when may I test, and when may I not test. And when you must test is in certain regulated positions, certain drivers, and then it's not, well, then there's sort of safety sensitive positions, which it's not regulated, but if you don't test and you've got somebody who's operating heavy machinery, that's really bad on you, and that could be negligent. So that's sort of when you must test. When we're talking about machinery, we're talking about drivers, we're talking about forklifts and other things. And then we have sort of the when may I test, and that is going to be for virtually any other position. And you got to think about it. Do you want somebody with certain issues to have access to your money, to have access to your books, to have access to your product? And it's a judgment call. Now we're not in negligence, but we're in a place of, which positions do I really care about that? And then when I may not test is primarily anything related, in most states, anything related to cannabis. More and more states are now saying that, recreational use is legal, medicinal use is legal, and you would be, there are some states that actually say you can't test for cannabis, but some that though they don't say it, because of all the other laws permitting it, it would be a bad idea to test people. So those are sort of the main buckets. And when you have drug testing, people self-select out. If they, so they think, well, I can't pass a drug test, and that may be the case, but they may still get the job. So you need to make clear that if you are not testing, or you're testing just for certain things, and testing positive doesn't mean you won't get a job, you should really make sure you communicate that to the community so people don't not try. And I think that's really important. And I think it's important also just in this industry to keep advocating for prohibitions and testing for cannabis generally. So I would, keep focusing on that piece. The other blockade is criminal background checks. And again, it's kind of the same structure, when must I check and when may I check? And when you must check is, again, when we're talking about certain regulated positions, certain contracts with the government and things like that. When may I check is only when it's relevant to the job. So you're not going to do a criminal background check on somebody who's, greeting people at the front door or answering your phones. I think that would be, in most states, not legal. But if you're going to have somebody who has access to your money, access to your intellectual property, that may be somebody you may want to check. You don't have to, but you may want to. And most states are starting to have what we call ban the box. And what that means is when somebody applies for a job, you can't ask them if they've been convicted of a crime. And then when you do the background check, you can only look at very limited things. It varies by state, but it typically says you can look back X amount of years, and it will say you can only look at these types of crimes. And then from there, if you get a background check where somebody has committed a crime, you have to then have a meet and confer process with them to see if the crime is such that we would be precluded or not want to hire them. And that's a very it's a good process, but it still doesn't help you with the people who would self-select out if they thought you were going to do a background check. So again, I would always recommend, for if you want to increase your diversity, to really think about, who do I need to do a criminal background check on, and why do I need to do it? And I recommend not doing it, or doing it, only when you really, really need to. And I also recommend, if you're not doing it and you're really committed to second chances, to let people know, because they will be afraid to apply if they think you're going to look. So again, that's a great way to just, go into a community that maybe, needs some opportunities, and just let them know that we're not doing that.
Well, I mean, and
So
also, the disproportionality of the fact that Black people were more prone to get incarcerated and arrested for cannabis would then lead you to have, that means that folks are going to have records. And so I think there is a reckoning, a coming of age in regards to saying, hey, we have this now legalized industry. It's such a shame when you have legislation, and this is not, the operator saying it, it's the state of Georgia, it's the state of Florida, it's the state of New Jersey, it's the state of Virginia that says if you can't pass a level 2 federal background check, you can't have a job, you can't be an investor, you can't work, you can't in the industry. And I think there are some ways that you can. I understand about wanting to understand who the person is, and what, if there is a criminal background. But I think Morgan really said it. Like, if you have someone that wants the opportunity to work where they're not touching the plan, there's some things I think should be looked at in regards to if it's the right fit, but not everything, and especially those things that are marijuana offenses that are on people's records. If that precludes them from being in the industry, then you're basically putting a lot of people out who basically have been who are wearing the brunt of the negative stigma and the issues that this industry has presented from a incarceration perspective. And that's a whole bunch of Black and brown people, and I don't think it's fair. And that's the whole kind of conversation around diversity in itself. And so you have to do a lot of advocacy work. Not only advocacy groups like M4MM, but we challenge the large NCIA, we challenge the big corporations who will have lobbyists to also lobby for that changing of that policy. Because if we can get everybody on board to either change it or to tweak it and make it better, then we can add more people to that workforce that that don't look alike, and that have that diversity that we're looking for.
Can I ask you, Roz, and I don't know, this may be like too big of a question, but I mean, I know that some states are addressing this now. I believe Colorado did recently, or at least in the
Yep.
last few years, as far as, I mean, where does that stand? Because it really is, to me, as sort of just an observer of this industry, I mean, it is so hypocritical that you cut out a whole group of people.
I
And I'm
think
just
that you're right.
wondering well, how where are those efforts? Like, are you getting anywhere? Is it just state by state, just lobbyists state by state trying to get them to make sure
Yep.
that those folks can be in the industry?
Yeah, it's just state
So
by
is it
state.
still a long way to go?
It's still state by state. I live here in Florida, and Florida you basically have to pass a level 2 federal background check to do anything in the industry. And so, the more that we see legalization happen, the more that we see some of the antiquated, thoughts and ideas from our lawmakers about this plant and about this industry, the more that we can break down some of those barriers. For example, employee protection wasn't a big issue 3 years ago. when I first started in the industry. But now that you've seen the proliferation of states that having, like Florida has 425,000 people have their medical marijuana cards. Well, that sheer number of people made employee protection become a really, a huge issue that had to be addressed. And so the cannabis industry as a whole, I mean, we have a responsibility. If you know there has been a segment of a population, of a community of people that have been, targeted and arrested, incarcerated, and have a charge on their record, that then now in the legalized industry won't even allow them just to participate. We're not even talking about ownership, just to be an employee. I think it is, it is the onus on us, not just me as an advocacy organization, because guess what? I don't have a lot of dollars. Like, I literally go and traipse all across the country when it's not COVID, living in Motel 8s and Motel 6s and trying to figure it out. So the ones that are spending $1.5 million of lobbying dollars towards safe banking, well, how about let's open up and try to figure out how we can, restructure some of these employee participation and some of these barriers to entry when it comes to workforce. And when we see that, that will also create a paradigm shift and change in mind of those executives at the top level. Because Morgan really said it. You have an opportunity. There's some things that you don't have to, but there's some rules and regulations that you put in place, like, checking, background checks, or like, drug testing, that you do it and it becomes it's a add-on that's not helping the organization, but it's really keeping certain people from even applying and coming to the organization. And really, it's scary. There's a lot of Black and brown people that feel like, man, you know what? I medicate, but I can't get a job. However, their white counterpart medicates and they get a job. So
So I'm so glad that we were able. This is really important for people to hear. I want to shift a little bit to retention and workplace culture. Again, I know the industry it's fragmented, it's new, but Jennifer, what did your research show about what is it like for women in the workplace, and do they want to stay? And what are you hearing from the women you've spoken to? Maybe you could share some anecdotes about what's happening, and why are women leaving when they don't feel safe, or they feel that it's a hostile work environment.
Well, the story in the data is that this industry does not treat women well at all. In fact, I would say significantly worse than many other industries. And I anticipate that there will be a lot of women who depart because it's not worth the struggle. We asked whether women felt that they're treated equitably in this industry, and just 11% said yes. That number is 7% for women of color. We asked whether they have the same opportunity for advancement as their male counterparts. 30% said yes. And just to compare, it's the same question that is asked in the McKinsey Lean In study from 2019. And 55% of women said yes there. So that's a pretty significant difference. We asked whether promotions were based on objective criteria. 22% said yes. And in other industries, that was 46%. We asked whether the best opportunities go to the most deserving employees. 22% said yes, compared with 40% in other industries. And one of the things that I think is very, it's just so difficult, is that we're not being taken seriously. 2/3 of women say that they're taken less seriously because of their gender, and that they have to work harder for the same level of respect. And so, it doesn't paint a very good picture, and the women that I've spoken to, one of the stories that I hear very often, more often than I can believe actually, is that women are hired, and then they do a good job, and then they're either demoted or let go, and a friend is brought in, generally a man who has possibly less experience, and then is paid more for this job. And it's not an isolated incident. It happens all the time. And so, the women, as I was mentioning before, the women in this industry are there because they're passionate and they want to be. And in a little bit of a twist, one of the questions we asked was whether they felt successful in this industry, and 87% said yes. So they're likely in this industry for reasons other than expecting to be treated equally. So I think there are going to be some that depart, and I think there are going to be some that feel successful and are going to stick with the fight. So,
and why do, I guess, did your research look at why why the workplace culture is such this way among women? Is it the sort of the roots of of the way the sort of the highly commercialized industry has taken off, that it's, so, I mean, as I write about in my book, it's really dominated in terms of the MSOs by white wealthy men. I mean, is that a part of it? What's the reason?
I would say that um, it is very much the bro culture. It's things like, not getting benefits with your job. It's just how they're treated by others. It's not being respected. It's not being welcomed. And I think, the roots of the industry have it's not become an industry that is like a typical one like tech or another, where there are still struggles for women. But I don't know, like there wasn't a clear answer in the research that
I was just curious. I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and I wanted to throw it over to Morgan, because one of the questions that I was thinking about was, especially again, these new companies that don't really have HR in place. Like, if you're a woman in one of these startups, how do you even voice that that you are that you feel you're being discriminated against? Or is it something, like we hear about in tech all the time, sort of about the death of a thousand cuts, right? Is these microaggressions. It's not necessarily one incident, it's a culture where women are not welcome. So I guess from a legal perspective, what should company executives be, and founders be thinking about, to kind of head some of this off and deal with it?
So one thing when I hear, the microaggressions, I think of, the law is like a sledgehammer, and with microaggressions and the small things that add up, you need surgery, a very, 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 you need microsurgery, really. But there are laws in place to protect workers. There's a huge focus right now on pay equity, and there are a flurry of laws, primarily state laws, because the federal law is sort of I don't want to say weak, but it's not as robust. It doesn't have the teeth that some of the state laws do. And there are pay equity requirements, and you have to meet them. And in California, for example, you actually have to turn over your pay equity data to the state, starting
Mm.
March 31st of next year, if you have 100 or more employees. So what the state's going to do with the data, I don't know at this point. But long way of saying that, pay equity is real, it's measurable, and you're going to be held accountable. So, and there are a number of companies that now can help you, crunch the numbers and look at it. And if you're feeling like everything's okay, but then you actually have empirical evidence showing what, Jennifer has just explained, then, even if you didn't feel it in your heart, you're going to have to feel it in the books. So I think that, founders should, from the get-go, think about how they're going to structure their pay, and how they're going to, structure their workforce, how they're going to look at advancement. In terms of somebody who feels like they've been discriminated against, or can really point to, and this is why the law is a sledgehammer, you have to really be able to point to, I didn't get that promotion and it wasn't fair, lawsuit, right? And what you really want is to not be there and have that happen in the first place. So while there are a number of ways you can complain and you can deal with it, from a legal perspective, inequity, you want to cut it off before you get there. And that is really, about knowing that if you're picking up the phone and calling me, that's really not where you want to be. um, I would say, another thing that I'm seeing a really, this issue is not unique to this industry. But I think that this industry has a huge opportunity to not become another, white male monolith. This is a time where, it's an industry that we're inventing ourselves right now.
Mhm.
And, there are a number of people out there now who are providing all types of um, diversity and inclusion and equity trainings. And I don't want you to hear when I say that, I'm going to sit down to a Zoom, PowerPoint, and somebody's going to tell me about, stuff I kind of heard times, but who will actually come in and they'll work with you to get it right, and listen to your mission, not, show up and say, this is how you have diversity. So I really encourage people to, take the time and reach out, because they're just, there's so many people out there right now who want to help you. So you don't get to the place where
But
you
be careful.
Pardon?
I said,
Oh,
but be
God.
careful, because there's a lot of people out there that want to help, but there are some that don't realize. I've seen some that just not are hitting the mark,
Mhm.
and you have to be careful, and you have to do your homework, and you have to ask questions, and you have to and being able to transfer a skill set from another industry. Cannabis is a very unique industry, and it has a lot of, it's unique, and it's the most highly complex, compliance driven industry. Then on top of that, it has this big old social animal, that are the social issues that are surrounding the industry. And when someone goes, oh yeah, I'm diversity, equity, and inclusion, I can, just being able to get them to understand, and walk a mile in the cannabis shoes is something that is very unique. And so if you can find someone that can do both, great. And if you have someone that's going to be able to support, a company's effort, but just be careful. That's all.
I think that's
Ross,
really
are
good.
there some consultants that you particularly like, or that you've seen workshops or have experienced their training that you would recommend to some of these companies?
Yeah. Well, because I do it myself, so I'll pick myself first. So, but
I don't
besides,
know.
that's okay. No, but that's okay, because I do it, but it's very limited, because I run M for MM, but M for MM is a nonprofit, and you guys know, as you can hear, I have a 16-year-old and I have a 22-year-old, and they're both getting ready. One's in college and one's getting ready to go to college, and so I always try to. My background was in marketing, business development, diversity training prior to starting M for MM, and so now I've gotten a chance to have the best of both worlds. I've existed in the corporate, in the healthcare industry, doing that, and now I have all this cannabis experience, and then I've been able to create a nonprofit that really address some of these issues, and now I marry all this together. So I'm kind of a unique unicorn in that perspective. But there are a ton of people out there, and if folks want to know, I'll have my information. I can make a referral. I just don't want to call out someone and forget someone else, and they go, "Well, Rob, what about me?" But there are some folks out there that do a great job. I just said that for uh, those um, those companies who are hiring, just to ask your questions. Um, it's not just asking for referrals. It's being able to put someone on the spot and have them correlate. How would you do this differently, or what are going to be the challenges that you think the cannabis industry will face regarding your recommendation? How do you make this work for cannabis? How do you make this work for the social issues that we have? How do you make, and if you can ask them these nice, open-ended questions, I think they will help you to make your final decision if this person's the right fit for you or not.
One of the things that you and I discussed when we spoke earlier was the idea of also these companies integrating diverse supply chains, which I thought was
Mhm.
really smart. Can you talk about that, and how that sort of, gets to this goal of I mean, not only increasing diversity, but like really, elevating it as a priority in the culture of a company. Can you talk
Sure.
about that, Ron?
Sure. There's four areas that I look at when you talk about, okay, I'm a company and I really want to create a really robust, diversity, equity, and inclusion plan for my company. What does that look like? And I go with the basics. First and foremost, don't try to do everything. You're not going to be able to do 20 different things in one year. Don't put all that pressure on yourself. find 3 to 4, maybe 5 areas that you really want to focus on and really drive those home. And be okay with setting outcomes and measuring your results. And if you don't hit your result numbers, if you don't hit where you want to be, it's okay, because guess what? You go back, you track why you didn't hit it, and then you revamp that plan and you get ready for the next year. But the 4 areas that I like to focus on are, of course, the executive suite level, so that C-suite level, the workforce development, so internally, mid-level management, senior level management, entry-level positions or what have you, supplier contracting. And that's where the area that we were talking about. So diverse supplier contracting, meaning from a vendor perspective, if you go and pull your large MSOs, Acreage, Statera Wellness, Curaleaf, Columbia Care, Ianthus, and if you see the amount of money that they spend on ancillary services and contracts, from anything from build out to architect to attorney to marketing, you name it, there's an absurd amount of money that's being spent to run these businesses. And the federal government has these federal programs that support diversity in your supplier contracting, in that supply chain. And so we just want to, challenge the industry to do the same. Look at, if you're spending $80 million a year or $20 million a year, how much of that 20 million are you spending with diverse companies, women-led companies, minority-led companies, women and minority-led companies? What does that look like? And how do you encourage more of that? And so I think it's something that's really, really unique. I shouldn't say unique, it's not unique, but I think it's something that, again, just like Morgan said and Jennifer said, we have such a unique opportunity with cannabis, because guess what, guys? We're in a marathon. We might be at the 3-mile marker, and the marathon has 26 miles. And we have so much room to grow in and to get it right now. And so that's what I encourage.
I would just add, I would just add with the contracting piece. Another thing that we recommend doing is not only looking at the ownership, but you can require that the people that you partner with contractually put certain people on the team and prove it up. Not just like, don't send me a pitch with a bunch of brown faces and then send me a bunch of others or on the work, but I want to see who's actually getting credit, who's actually getting paid, who's going to get a bonus if it goes well. I want to see all of that, and you can do that. I mean, it's a little harder with an employment relationship to demand certain affirmative action and quotas, because that's where we are legally in our conversation right now. But you can do it when you're contracting. So do it, demand it, make them show it.
Yeah, second tier. That's called second tier subcontracting, where you basically, if you're subbing out, you can put that demand in saying, listen, we want 30% of your subbing out to go to minority-owned businesses, and you got to show me in order to keep your contract. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. We are starting to get a couple of questions, and just for the audience, I want to let you know that we just have a few minutes left. So if you have questions, please submit them, and you can direct them to a particular panelist. This one comes from Alexis Olive. And she asked Jennifer, would you agree that women tend to be better leaders because they are in tune with the emotional needs of their team, creating more trust and loyalty, which would increase retention?
Yes, but I have data that would support it. So when I say that 87% of the women consider themselves successful, I ask them to define what success means. And the vast majority have said that it's not just about the bottom line. It's about helping others. It's about making a difference. It's about, growth. And so that definition of success would say to me that yes, that's exactly right. What women leaders have a tendency to, how do I say this nice? Okay, so here's my favorite definition of success, and it was everyone around me eats too. And to me, that proves that question, that women are looking at everyone around them when they're considering their success and the success of their business and the success of their employees, not just their own bottom line.
Just since we only have a few minutes left, so to that point, I guess if each of you maybe could comment, what I think we've all been saying all along. I think there's agreement here that we need more women and more people with diverse backgrounds in leadership. So, what needs to happen in this industry to ensure that that can happen? And do you have thoughts on creative ways that maybe the industry should be working towards that, or advice for founders from different backgrounds? I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Roz, do you want to go?
How do you
Sorry. Okay.
We lost you for a
So
second.
it's just a matter of trust. You operators who are looking to expand out, who are looking to acquire. I know sometimes it's comfortable to have someone that is like in your inner circle that may have been around or what have you. I do believe that there are women out there that if you can just give them that commitment, that trust, give them the resources that you would give any, their male counterpart. Um, Give them the leeway, give them the time to show success. Trust, give them, take the hands off the rein a little bit and let them do, show that they're worthy of that trust and what have you. I think you would be surprised how we will win and excel. And some of the things that we're talking about in regard to creating a more diverse culture in an organization, women, because we come from diversity, because we are diverse, we are going to be the ones that champion that from the top down. We are going to be the ones that really are trying to figure out, like, hey, it's time for me to hire that consultant, or we're really ready to expand out our supplier diversity channel. I just believe that, the individuals, the folks that are funding these, the ones that are creating these projects, look at the women that are out here that really are on the cusp of, they've shown you their expertise, they've shown you their strength, and that when you see that, and the thing about it is, we as women, we tend to run households. We care for children. We can run a business, and and also be a great supporter and love on people. And then when you get all that meshed together, man, you got a super fire person that you could put to the head of an organization that can really make your bottom line really sing. So that's my thought. Just trust that we can get it done.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I would say accountability. And it starts with personal accountability, making sure that you address your own biases and watch your own behavior. And then it's accountability for speaking up when there is disrespectful behavior or biased behavior in the workplace. And if you're in charge, that's holding people who violate policies and who are biased or discriminatory, even if they're top performers. Like, it's having the accountability to make a decision to let someone go if they are causing a hostile workplace. And I see that doesn't happen all the time. That behavior is allowed. And so if you're allowing that behavior, you're complicit. So it starts with you.
Morgan, last word.
Oh gosh, last word. Wow, bat and cleanup. No pressure. I think trust and accountability are really the right thing, because I think it's really fear that holds us back. You hear this a lot, that opening yourself up to diverse voices actually increases your value. It's not about you doling out a little piece of something to somebody to have a chance. It's actually, if you're receptive and open up, it's really going to help you at the end of the day be successful. I will say that I think I've always sort of thought of it as this way: is like there's a pie, and the people who have the pie can give out a little piece. And when they give a little piece to somebody who's in their tribe, it doesn't worry. They don't worry about it. But when they give it to somebody else, they feel like, now my pie is smaller. And what I challenge people always to do is feel like, sharing the pie, it just gets bigger. It really does. And you have to trust. You have to trust. And, I I hope everybody, gives themselves a moment to trust and to let go of some fear.
Well, and I would say that I think in the tech world, there's certainly data to back that up, where you look at portfolios that have invested in female-founded, female-led companies, where they have outperformed companies that are only male-founded. And so perhaps in the future, as this industry evolves, we'll be able to actually look back at the data in cannabis and see that, because I think that there is a lot of agreement in general that across the board that having the more people you can have with diverse voices at the table, it's better for innovation. It's better for the bottom line. So I thank all of you for the work that you do and for sharing your wisdom with the audience today. Thank you so much, Jennifer Wetzel, Morgan Forsey, and Roz McCarthy for joining us on this really informative panel. And I wish all of you good health and a great Thanksgiving. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Heather.
Heather.